Hello and a warm welcome to Ars Electronica home delivery, our service during the times when you cannot, unfortunately, visit our museum here in Linz. My name is Michaela, and for this week's episodes, live from the Ars Electronica Center, we focus on Upper Austria, so the Upper Austrian special, now here in deep space, deals with a very, very interesting possibility that we have here in our projection room. We can present high-resolution photographs. And what you can see behind me already is one of the stained glass windows of the cathedral here in Linz. The new cathedral that is the largest church in Austria, larger than St. Stephen's in Vienna. And the new cathedral, as the name implies, is not a Gothic medieval church. It is a neo-Gothic style. It was built during this Gothic revival in the 19th century. So the first stone of the new cathedral here in Linz was laid in 1862. Then in 1924, when the church was finally finished, it was consecrated as the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. And what is really outstanding about this church is not only the architecture, it's also the glass-stained windows. And now please come with me, because as I mentioned before, this is a gigapixel photography, a photo where we can zoom in. And I will do this from a touch screen here in the background of our deep space. So, and anyway, glass-stained windows in churches are always really, really impressive. And these windows here in the Linz Cathedral were manufactured in Innsbruck in Tyrol at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And we start with one of the most famous windows. It is the so-called Linz window. And with this window, the city of Linz wanted to represent itself as a city of sovereigns, a city of the arts, and of science. So let's start here with a very, very famous emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III. He lived in Linz at the end of the 15th century, and he died here in Linz in 1493. His heart is buried in the old cathedral in Linz. His body is buried in Vienna in St. Stephen's Cathedral. So Frederick III, the first monarch of the Habsburg family. Then besides him is his son, Maximilian I. He was called the Last Knight. During his rule, the era of the knights more or less declined. But here you can see him as he is crowning a poet, so he's a friend of the arts, so to say. And then next, another sovereign of the Habsburg family. This is Ferdinand, and he married Anna from Bohemia and Hungary here in Linz in 1521. So you can see this beautiful scene here where he's more or less given Anna the ring. Yeah, and during this marriage in 1521 in Linz, a tournament was held. And here you can see the Knight of Losenstein. Losenstein was a fortress close to Linz. And he was the winner of the tournament. Actually, he was challenged by a Spanish knight here on the main square in Linz. And he definitely was inferior to the Spanish knight, but he was a very witty and clever man. He could win the tournament because his horse bit the horse of the Spanish knight, so that the Spanish knight had to give up and surrender. Yeah, and here a very, very important scientist, an astronomer. This is Johannes Kepler. Kepler lived here in Linz in the 16th century, and one of his main works, the Harmonices Mundi, was written by him here in Linz. And in his hand, he's holding a telescope, the technology of the 16th century, of course. And there's also a celestial globe under his hand here. So these are really, really famous personalities of Linz. And as the church is the Church of the Immaculate Conception, consecrated to Saint Mary, you can see Mary here as she's looking down on the city of Linz. But there's a special churchly hierarchy, or so you would call it, because on top here is God, of course. When you zoom in, you can really see the beautiful stained glass painting. And it's really wonderful when you're inside the church and the sun shines through these colorful glass windows. It gives the whole church a beautiful light atmosphere. Yeah, and by the way, if you want to see Linz a bit closer, how it looked like at the beginning of the 20th century, because this window was more or less produced in 1910 or so. Yeah, here are the sights of Linz. This is the church on the Pöstlingberg, so a mountain on the other side of the Danube. A beautiful Baroque church is up there. I can only recommend it if ever you come to Linz. Then go up the Pöstlingberg, so the hill more or less. Yeah, and here is the Danube, and a beautiful bridge over the Danube that does not exist anymore, unfortunately. This is the railway bridge, a cast iron bridge. And this bridge was built at the end of the 19th century and demolished in 2016 because it was in a very, very bad state, very bad condition. And a new bridge is still built since 2016. So the old cathedral is also here, the cathedral with the two towers. And interesting enough, as the new cathedral was only finished in the 1920s, we can already have more or less the finished cathedral here on the window of 1910. And here you can again see the beautiful Gothic revival architecture of the 19th century. Yeah, and by the way, there was a law, more or less, in the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy that no church in the monarchy should be higher than St. Stephen's in Vienna. And so the tower of the new cathedral is 135 meters tall, which is 2 meters less than St. Stephen's in Vienna. So, at the bottom here, it's also quite interesting. Here we have composers that are important for the city of Linz. So the right one is Anton Bruckner. He was the organist in the old cathedral, wonderful composer. Yeah, and this one you might recognize, very popular face, I'd say, easy to recognize. This is Ludwig van Beethoven. So he was not a son of the city of Linz, but his brother was a pharmacist here in Linz, and so he visited the city several times. So actually, Linz is not Beethoven's city, but he was here. So, and of course, building a cathedral costs a lot of money, and so the church needed, let's say, secular financial support. And here we have the sponsor of this window, I mean, the building of the sponsors. Very beautiful building in the heart of the city of Linz. This is the Sparkasse, so a bank, one of the first banks here in Linz. They more or less financed this window, and here you can see the director of the bank, the Sparkasse, and it's quite a nice scene because here is a very, let's say, a woman of the ordinary people, and she takes her savings to the bank, and in return, of course, she gets the savings book here, handed over by the director of the bank in Linz. And this is the logo of the Sparkasse, beautifully done in this glass-stained window. Yeah, a beehive, and the bees take in, their savings. So a symbol for the bank. Yeah, so this is one of the most beautiful windows in the nave of the new cathedral. Another one is the so-called Emperor's window. So the new cathedral was built during the reign of Franz Joseph I, the emperor of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, and here you can see him. It's very iconic, Franz Joseph I, as he was the emperor from 1848 until 1914, so a very long time. Yeah, here you can see him already a bit older. And Franz Joseph liked to go hunting, and he did so in Bad Ischl in Upper Austria. And the interesting thing here is that Franz Joseph is depicted as more or less as an ordinary man of the common people. Because anyway, he's kneeling in front of the statue of Saint Mary, and look what he's wearing. As he's on holidays in Bad Ischl, he's wearing hiking boots and knickerbockers. And that was very unusual, that you could see the knee of the emperor. Interesting scene here. Yeah, and his predecessor, his successor also here besides him. And the bottom part, you can see Franz Joseph's daughter, Marie Valerie, her husband, Franz Salvator, and the grandchildren of the emperor. Yeah, and what are they doing when Franz Joseph is in Bad Ischl? They're playing with, the signs, the insignia of power, more or less, which normally they would not be allowed to do so. Yeah, and here is a beautiful face, the beloved Empress Sissi, the wife of Franz Joseph. And at the time when this window was produced, she was already dead. She was assassinated in 1898. And so she's shown here as Saint Elizabeth with the roses. Yeah, and at the very bottom of this window you can see a boat, a ship here. Elizabeth was a princess from Bavaria. She was only 15, 16 years old when she got married to Franz Joseph. And as before the marriage, before the wedding, she was kind of introduced to the Austrian people, because from Bavaria she traveled on this ship here on the Danube to Vienna, and that was really a big event for the people back then. So in 1854, all the people of Upper Austria more or less kind of welcomed the new empress at the riverbank of the Danube here in Linz. So you see, these windows actually have quite secular motives. But I have an interesting window now for you that is located in the choir of the new cathedral. And the interesting thing here is that the window that you see here, the birth of Jesus, as many other windows, are at an altitude of about 22 meters. So when you stand inside the cathedral, you can hardly see details. And the great thing is that Florian Fogenader, the photographer, got a special permission to enter the choir empore, and he could take the pictures. And this one is a very peculiar one, because when you take a closer look here at the Holy Family, the birth of Jesus, something is not right here. On the right-hand side, you have the baby Jesus, just born, but nobody really cares about him, except the two angels here. So what happened here? It's a simple explanation. During World War II, some of the windows on the south side of the cathedral were damaged. And then in the decades after the war, they were of course restored. And this was one of the last windows that was restored in the beginning of the 1960s. And apparently the men who put the windows in made a bit of a mistake. Rumor has it that they already were celebrating that the windows are complete now, and maybe they were a bit drunk. Because they mixed up two windows. And I can show you now a version that was kind of corrected with Photoshop. A colleague of mine did that, because the scene looks way better when you exchange the two windows, and now the two scenes here are perfect, because baby Jesus gets his attention. Here is Mary and Joseph. It's no problem, it's a very intimate scene here. And here, the shepherds that get the message that Jesus was born. So everything's all right here. And the interesting thing is that really when you stand inside of the new cathedral, you can hardly see that something's not right with this window. And with gigapixel photography, more or less, we can detect things like this. But mainly this gigapixel photography technology gives us a totally new insight into beautiful masterpieces of the arts. So with this, we're at the end of the presentation here. Thanks for joining us this time, and hope to see you soon again. Goodbye.